So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming here this afternoon. So how we're going to do the talk, we are just going to talk about rendered city a bit and run you through the pieces that are exhibited today here. And then we're going to talk about a relevant project that we curated in London last year. And we are also going to screen Lawrence Legg's pyramid schemes and Max Coulson's construction lines. And at the end, please feel free to ask us any questions that you might have. Thank you.
So rendered cities is basically the outcome of sort of a longer research project that we've undertaken together, which is kind of the starting point is thinking about how digital renderings are changing the field of architecture and in turn also our experience of urban space, of domestic space, and being in cities, and how they've kind of taken, so kind of something unreal that's taken over the actual urban fabric. And so this show has works by 3 artists, which are all new works. This video is normally just playing. We've already obviously paused it for now. This is an installation by Felicity Hammond called Property, and in the back, Laura Yule's work, which Julia will talk about in a second. Felicity Hammond, I guess you can all kind of see the work really well from where you're sitting. So she is trained as a photographer and works with photography and sculpture to question the aesthetics of digital renderings and specifically often billboards and hoardings. And so what you'll often see is her work that she'll take something that's photographic and then turn it into something sculptural, which kind of calls attention to how often with real estate, the billboards or the facade becomes more important than what's actually behind it. And she's very much interested in how these images are often already glitched or pixelated and already kind of outdated when they're put into the world. And she basically works along the thesis that this projects the buildings before they've even been built into ruins. So they're kind of already ruins before they've been built. Which obviously relates to kind of real estate under capitalism, where kind of buildings are constantly being rebuilt and constructed to extract maximum property value. So this installation consists of a lot of these kinds of prints that are also glitched and incomplete. And then this kind of green color, which sort of sucks you in and is kind of, like the way I read it is that it's sort of this pure potential, obviously like the green screen, that you can project anything onto it, but it sort of becomes, it's kind of emptied of any sort of authenticity or meaning. So she's also thinking a lot about how with the lack of authenticity in our cities, how basically renderings are kind of attempting to bring that back and to sell real estate through that. So, yeah, do you want to talk about Laura's work? Yeah.
So at the back, there's Unit 1 by Laura Yule, which is a new work that she made for this show. And in Laura Yule's practice and in this work in particular, what's really important is the merging of public and private space. So on the one hand, digital technology and the Internet of Things are increasingly colonizing our houses and our private spaces and domestic spaces by commercializing them. And on the other hand, in the space of the city, increasingly public space is being privatized by redevelopment firms. So it's this kind of like 2 parallel motions that are making the boundaries between public and private space increasingly blurred, and it's really at this conjunction that Laura reflects. And in this work, as you can see, there is a family of 3 mannequins which takes center stage, and then there's also dollhouse furniture and a washing machine, and these elements all recall an idea of the domestic space and domesticity, whose privacy it's being completely kind of like eroded by these technologies. But at the same time, this domestic space cohabits with the rawness and materiality of construction sites. So in the exhibition, in the installation, you can see some kind of like miniature construction sites. So there are billboards, and inside you can see the rubbles. And also there are a really important elements are the slogans. So on the billboards and on the wall there are slogans, which are the ones used by development firms to kind of like not only sell the property, but also create certain kinds of aspirations of a purer life, a happy life, and a state of ideal well-being, which is obviously unattainable. And a very important element in this installation is also the soap. So the mannequins are covered with soap. And in Laura Yule's practice, soap is really connected with the idea of sanitization, both sanitization of the body through ideas of well-being and wellness that are sold to us and kind of like assessed through apps that track our bodies and kind of like commercialize all sorts of activities that we do, but also the sanitization of public space and cities through redevelopment. So the soap kind of like also keeps this parallel between private space and public space.
Finally, Pyramid Skins by Lawrence Slack. I don't know if you're all familiar with his work. He normally creates virtual worlds and speculative films that reflect a lot on the symbolism of certain architectural structures. Here is very focused on pyramidal structures, and we will play the film in just a second. But uses gaming software here and 3D animation to fuse fiction and reality, and in order to highlight the impact of the virtual in our physical environment. In this film that he did for this show, so it's new work, but it's based on an essay that was published on the issue 7 of the White Review in 2013, and so you go through all the different parts of the essay, but it reflects on really famous structures like the Shard and the Eiffel Tower and Notre Dame, and so it really will reflect how these pyramidal structures represent certain social conditions and wealth throughout history, and I think it's important to mention. You'll see in this work in particular, it uses footage of the Assassin's Creed game, and so it really takes on a really playful. It really does a very playful take on this subject, as we have this really serious essay playing on the background, quite academic. We also have this figure climbing in impossible ways, all these like structures, and so it really engages us on a first person with these different subjects. So I think we can just play the video now, and then I'll talk a bit more about his work, taking us back to a really interesting group of work he did, but more based around London. But I think we can just play the video now. So we also thought that would be worth mentioning Bonus Levels, another work by Lawrence Slack that he has been developing. It's like a world, he calls it a world in progress, that unfolds as an ongoing series of software, videos, performances, and installations. You can access it through bonuslevels.net. It is conceived as a virtual novel. It has all these like chapters and uses simulation as a medium to assemble site-specific collage of objects and places drawn from reality. And so these are critical fictions that draw from the language of architecture and cinema to explore altered states of presence and memory that exist in digital space. So each level is rendered visible to the observer through a first-person perspective, as pyramid schemes that we just saw, and I would like to highlight. I would really recommend to go on the website of this project and download see the videos and download them, because some of these are games and you can actually navigate them on a first person and level. And for example, Unreal Estates is a film in which the Royal Academy in London was converted into a real estate property to be sold to rich Chinese investors. And so, yeah, just go and see more.
We continue?
Yeah. This research really started from our experience of living in London. For example, we have here some images of a very specific case that we see in our everyday life. There is Elephant and Castle in London. That is currently being redeveloped. By this real estate company called Delancey's, and it's a really problematic thing if you go online. There's this activist group that really tackles this problem and is organizing all these actions against this real estate development. And so, here, what is really visible in this development are the billboards full of this render imagery that we talked about through this show, and the previous projects that we did that we're just going to talk about in a few minutes. That it's, once again, all these images of a dreamlike life that are used to sell as an impossible life in the city.
Yeah, so we're just going to talk briefly about kind of a project that was sort of the basis for this one. So basically, coming off of our experience of living in London and how the proliferation of digital renderings in the city. Basically, we were able to do an exhibition in this very strange neighborhood in London, which is East India Quay, that is basically close to Canary Wharf, which is obviously basically the financial hub district of London. And basically there you have this architecture that was built in the late 80s, early 90s to house offices, but it's kind of already incredibly outdated and feels very, even though it's not even incredibly old, it already feels very outdated, and basically the whole area is being redeveloped and kind of also sold as kind of a hub for the arts. And so we were kind of also in a strange position because we were able to secure a quite good exhibition space there, but that was obviously belonged to developers who had an interest in people, young curators like us, bringing in emerging artists. So we just wanted to show a few images kind of that space to demonstrate kind of how strange, how kind of weird of a building it is. That is, yeah, again, kind of this, almost like a crystal palace as well, like just, yeah. And so basically this was a building that was going to be refurbished completely, but while it hadn't been there, while it wasn't, we were basically able to do this exhibition there, and also artists were renting out studios in this office building for incredibly cheap. So it's kind of this, we were obviously in this very kind of poignant position of being able to use this space before it had actually been, so in order to profit off of us to then become something else that then would be unaffordable and inaccessible, if that makes sense. So, yeah. So yeah, it was called A Place for You to Dream. So again, we were thinking a lot about projection of like a fantasy of what life can be in the city, and especially also we were focused a lot more on domestic space as well. We had less about maybe the city as a whole. Yeah, So we're just gonna briefly talk about the other works in the exhibition. So basically, the exhibition was Felicity Hammond and Laura Yule were included in that exhibition as well, and then we worked with Katie Connor and an artist called Max Coulson, whose video we will screen in just a bit.
Yeah, so this work by Katie Connor is basically, so this is the installation form, but the work is called Pure Flow, and it was born as an app in 2012. The app tracks the way in which signal, GPS signal and Wi-Fi kind of like permeates both private and public space, even if we don't see it. It's like obviously in the air and bounces off architecture and bodies. And the app and also the installation kind of like shows the way in which all these signals move around. So by including this work in the exhibition, we kind of like wanted to think about a perhaps different way in which digital technologies affect our both domestic and public space, because they just permeate them.
This. Oh, sorry, I always forgot about this. Here on the right, we see the work that Laura Yule did for A Place for You to Dream, in which you use more in a decorative way some of these mechanisms to block and create these tensions between private and public. And I don't know if it's very visible here, but these clothes basically have prints of buildings being demolished. And then on the left, we have the work that Felicity Hammond, who did this work here, did for that show. And she also combines, once again, like Brenda already mentioned, in relation to the work in this exhibition, photography and objects, and so it's really this mix between virtual and physical, and in a very direct way. Can you? This installation is the one I'm talking about.
Yeah. Keep going. Oh yeah. So we also did Laura Yule as part of her practice, and as part of the show, she did a kind of performance / event that was called Asset Arrest, which basically involves her pretending to be someone interested in buying a luxury property, and then bringing people on the tours. So she poses as someone who, also as an artist based between New York and London, who's looking to buy. And it was very. So we went on a tour, and it was a very interesting experience of kind of, on the one hand, how you're treated as someone who's allegedly wanting to buy a place like this. And this was all very luxurious apartments in very crappy neighborhoods, like not desirable places to live. So the language that they use around trying to make it attractive is all about, this is all up and coming. It was kind of this sort of infiltration of a scenario where most of us would probably not necessarily be in. And then also the way that these flats have been furnished already looks like something that it's kind of almost indistinguishable from a digital image of a flat that you would see kind of on a billboard.
And then another event that we did was a walking tour. The title was The Opaque Zone, Docklands, and the Regeneration of Neoliberalism, and it was led by Dr. Luis Moreno, who is a visual culture lecturer at Goldsmiths, University of London. So in the tour, we went around Canary Wharf, which is, as Brenda was mentioning before, the financial district, one of the financial districts in London, and it was built on a former Docklands area in the 80s, so the whole area was kind of like completely bought by a group of developers, and to this day it's privately owned. So there's like a huge district in the city that it's public, like private, not public. So actually when we went here, this is some kind of like sky garden that's like looks like a public space, but the very fact that we were there as a group really attracted the attention of the security that patrols the area. So they came there and kind of like started asking like, oh, what are you doing? Like, why are you here? Because it's, again, it's a private area. So it's like a perfect example of how an entire like space in the city can be privatized.
They're worried about big groups being there and are also able to enact authority over us, just occupying that space as a group. They were actually just worried about us being protesters.
Yeah.
Apparently, which, yeah.
Yeah. And then, so you probably saw when we were showing some installations shot from A Place for You to Dream that the other work was this video, Construction Lines by Max Coulson, which we're going to screen in a second. So this work was commissioned by us for this exhibition, and then went on to win quite a few, like 2 important awards in London, the Tenderflix Artist Video Award and the Best Fiction Short at the Architectural Film Festival in London. So the video is about iceberg homes, which is a phenomenon that's happening in London in neighborhoods such as Knightsbridge or Chelsea, these very extremely wealthy neighborhoods in West London, where of course most properties are Victorian houses, anyways, like kind of older properties, so there's no really a way to redevelop them from the outside. So what rich people do is that they build like a lot of different levels underground and create this like iceberg effect. Therefore, the property is very small on top, and then it just gets these huge basements. And this particular iceberg home that Max is talking about in the film was never built because there were hundreds of complaints from neighbors. And actually how the narrative of the movie progresses, you will see it's through all the complaints and all the letters that have been sent to the local council by neighbors. And yeah, we find this video, and we kind of want to end the talk with this video because we really find that Max, of course, obviously developed this video with 3D animation and using SketchUp, so kind of like using the exact same techniques that are used to create the rendered images that we are critiquing in the very first place, but he was able to appropriate the same visual language to kind of critique and show us how it's possible to infiltrate the same language and use it in a different way.
Yeah, that's kind of it from us. But if we're happy to take any questions or thoughts or anything if you want to. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, thank you. Are there drinks? Is that a thing in the end? That should be something to announce.
There is a question, I think.
Yeah?
I was just thinking about how you talked about how buildings become outdated super quickly now. And I was thinking about the kind of parallel between technological obsolescence of things like iPhones or whatever, whereas you buy them and they're designed to kind of fall out of use within a short time span, and how kind of architecture accommodates itself to technological change, and I guess that's a sort of different relationship than that architecture has a technological relationship with renderings and image culture, and then with commodity culture. So I guess I don't know if that's not a question. That's not.
It's a nice comment.
No, I mean, I think it's interesting in relation to Laura's work as well, who's thinking a lot about this kind of ideas around smart homes and kind of actually architecture integrating certain kinds of technology that's supposedly incredibly makes life so much easier, which, yeah, indeed, maybe we'll constantly in the future be living in houses that will be broken and we have to always
Yeah.
replace stuff inside of them. I don't, yeah.
Can you kind of talk about your experience of, it seemed like you were kind of, it was like a post-gentrification of that building, where you were having those studios and you had your show, and it was really just to get people in there to see it, to like kick all of you out, to pretty rich people. So can you talk about that a little?
Yes, so the area where we did the show was not a very desirable area per se. It's kind of like in this area, like it's very close to Canary Wharf in London, but it's kind of like in the middle of nowhere, not like extremely well connected to other like spots. And it's just really like this area that's like next to a motorway, and there's like a data center. So it's like just a bit of like a random piece of London. So there was this development firm that was redeveloping 2 buildings, and one was the one that we were using, and then there was another one. But in the end, actually, to this day, the building where we did the exhibition still hosts artist studios, and still has. So they don't like take proposal, but they kind of like exhibit work by artists that are in the studios. So it still is kind of like no one was really kicked out. Yeah. There were also some like kind of like start-up in the same building, because it's quite a big space. It's like I reckon like 10 floors. So as of now, actually, perhaps it was not as desirable as they thought it was gonna be. If that makes sense.
That thing of the Barbican now hosts a residency there now?
As well,
right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely they were able to enter London art scene because they were able to start collaborating with the Barbican, which is like a very important London institution, art institution. So, yeah, they were able to infiltrate that, but then, yeah, as of now, it's still a cultural hub, I guess you would say. Like, yeah.
But it definitely felt like something that was being sort of, they were trying to sell it as something that it wasn't at all. Exactly. And like actually it's very bleak. I mean, it was super fun to do a show there, but it's not fun to go to that area or to walk around. So it was really, kind of also then the developers who were basically hosting us, if you go to their website, everything looks super glamorous and like it's going to be some kind of destination for people, but that is not really in sight so far.
I'm interested in the fact that you haven't showed any pictures of what the box where the exhibition took place.
Yeah.
How it sits within that building, because it's kind of a strange thing as well. Mm-hmm. And I'm also interested in the fact that here in that space, it's the first time I come, so I believe those walls are here originally. The walls for this installation, but what led to the decision of presenting them here as well in that kind of transparent way of like showing the fakeness, I would say, of the build, because that to me relates to what was in that space.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't really show how the exhibition space sits in the building because we didn't have a good image of it, but it is a good, basically Cedric has been there, so he knows. It's like, thanks for pointing that out. But because it's this kind of atrium-like building, that kind of tower, you kind of are in this kind of, when you're inside, you're in a space and you just see all the floors go up.
It's like a covered courtyard.
Yeah. So the exhibition space is just built inside of that. It's like a cube held together by like some kind of really thin walls and timber. And then they have installed this massive video screen that maybe you saw in the image, which was like developers' ideas of what the exhibitions need, which was quite funny. But and then there's definitely, I mean, even that building was so, like, parts of it looked like Felicity's work, like these plants, like they had weird kind of fake plants in areas, and then this white marble. Definitely there's interesting like parallels there. Like I guess it's then becomes the weird thing of art kind of then, like also the art kind of is indistinguishable from the real thing, because sometimes things are so, like the actual built environment becomes really absurd as well. I don't know.
Okay,
Thank you so
we can have a little
much.
drink. I think.
Thanks so much for coming.
Yes, thank you very much.